Hi, and welcome to the Blurry Turtle Podcast, Nighttime Low Quality Edition. It's around 2 a.m. I can hear a cat making noise in the distance. And similar to that cat, I'm struggling a little bit. Just finished watching the Anisimova-Osaka match. One of the best matches of the tournament. I'll get into that tomorrow for the finals. Tremendous play from Anisimova, great depth of shot. It's really what won her the match, I think. You know, Osaka was playing great defense, putting the ball back with great depth. I think, the way she kind of fizzled out was she was counterpunching through most of this match and, maintained great depth and put balls back that surprised even Anisimova. But it's hard to counterpunch for a whole match. Eventually she did start to sail some balls long. And when a player is driving the ball at you and starts to see some results, it sort of locks them into that level. So Anisimova played, very clutch at the end. A lot of difficult holds. Just a tremendous match, honestly. Either player could have won. I think if Osaka had won, I might have liked her in the finals also, just given how much power she was able to generate on her serve. But for now, it's Anisimova. Congratulations to her. Great showing for Osaka also. Great to see her back playing good tennis. Hopefully she appreciates. Obviously today she's going to be upset, but hopefully, it boosts her spirits a bit and, keeps her playing. She has definitely 3 or 4 years at least of solid tennis left. Kind of want to do something special for the semifinals, but it's 2 a.m. and I'm fried and there's a day match. So I'm just going to try to get this up tonight. Djokovic, Alcaraz. I'll do that second since it's a little bit better. The night match is Sinner and Auger-Aliassime. Analyzing Sinner matches is getting pretty easy. He doesn't give anyone anything. He could have probably zipped Musetti in the first set. It was, 4-zip going towards, the end of the set. It was really a situation where, Musetti just couldn't score. I give a lot of credit to Musetti in this match. He started to play hyper aggressive, as soon as the first set was over. Found a tremendous level. Had some break points in the second. Had a few games where he was at 30 all on Sinner's serve. Maybe he could have taken that set. I don't think he wins the match anyway, but he did, I think, get a look at the level he needs to get to. And I think he rose to that level for a handful of games, which is good to see because, Musetti, when he plays extremely aggressive, he looks like a player who belongs at the top of the game in those moments. The rest of the time he does play pretty passive. He's a defensive-minded player, with tremendous shot making. There's nothing really missing from his game. His backhand might be a slight liability. When they were hitting backhands with pace, it felt like Musetti had to check out and go to the slice quite often. It's hard at this point to slice the ball to Sinner, unless it goes, sharply cross court to his backhand. From there, you kind of know what to expect. If you're slicing the ball and it's going down the middle, the second he steps around his backhand, you're in trouble because he creates really good shape inside out from there. And, he can hook it down the line with the same basic footwork. So just, it's getting hard to read Sinner and he's not missing. When Musetti hit with full pace, he did manage to make Sinner make some errors. But I think at that point, Sinner was also in the mode of not missing anything, of getting everything back. It almost became a sort of ego thing that he was just going to get back whatever Musetti threw at him. In that state, you can sometimes make some timing errors. You can get a bit smothery, where you're just trying to make the get rather than think about, what shot you're coming up with or whether it might be better to go with something softer and give up position. I think in a bigger point, Sinner might have made some different choices. Not really any errors here from him, though, in this match. He played great. He served well. And it's a good win. It's a win around the level of Felix. Also, I think Felix and Musetti would have been a very close match. So, this match here, Sinner should just win. He's just way more solid, has more weapons. I think he actually serves better than Felix, and has a better forehand. And those are the two things that Felix has been thriving with. Felix had a match with Alex de Minaur that, Alex easily could have won. Everybody will come away from a match and say, oh, I should have won this point or that point. But Alex had a lot of chances here. Ton of breaks in this match. 8 breaks a serve. And they saved a bunch of break points as well. So overall, the difference here was, if you look at the serve numbers, 64% for Felix, 42% for Alex. Alex, the announcer, I was listening to Ryan Harrison, who did a pretty good job. I like actually that he's a bit blunt. He's humble about his own tennis career. On the court, I remember thinking he was kind of what's a respectful way to say douchey? But listening to his announcing, I think I might have had that wrong. He might have just had, a temper and been a fiery guy. But, he was just, making a good point, which is that Alex kept trying to go big on his first serve. And he was missing. And I don't think, given the situation and how kind of vulnerable Felix was here early in the match, I don't think Alex should have been going big. I think, the Ayala strategy of just landing a high first serve percentage would have worked. Obviously once you've committed to trying to land first serves, you're just going to keep going to it. Once you stop, once you're below 50%, you're struggling and you just want to get it right. And, everybody is great in practice. All these guys serve great in practice. All these guys hit clean winners when they want to in practice, and out in the court, the pace of the game and the pressure and all this stuff just makes it really difficult. So he had a rough day. It is, his liability. He was way too solid early in the match for Felix. Felix just kind of hung on with some big serves, but as things went, I feel like Alex's backhand broke down. Same thing I kind of saw against Sinner. Alex has a very short take back and a very compact swing with his backhand. He kind of guides the ball back rather than driving it. And, that works okay. But I think we saw Cam Norrie struggle as the match dragged on against Djokovic. Same thing here. It's just hard to be that accurate with that short of a swing, in a long match against players hitting the ball pretty big. I think the one shift Felix made as the match went on that really worked was hitting his forehand inside out. Early on, he wanted to hit his forehand only to Alex's forehand, and he wasn't really dominating that matchup because he was a little more error prone. It's harder for him to find winners from there, and Alex was fine, rallying. Even if the ball kicks up high on Alex's forehand, if he's taking the ball across court, he's comfortable with that. The backhand exchanges, I think Felix didn't want to be in because Alex wasn't missing. So when he had a forehand, he never really went to the backhand. That just kind of made him predictable. Once he shifted and started going to the backhand also, Alex kind of started to make errors. He wasn't able to, find, you don't want to go to someone's backhand when you lose the backhand exchanges with your forehand, because the second you go there, that guy's just driving the ball cross court and then you're trapped again. But it is a stronger shot for Felix. And also, if you're going inside out, you're kind of already there. So you're putting a little pressure on Alex to come up with a sharper angle. Overall, great win for Felix. This is a great result for him. I don't see a path for him, past Sinner. There's some wins in the past for him in 2022. He beat him in Cincinnati. I don't really think, Sinner is the same player here. Obviously, Felix has a huge game. 2022, he won twice in Cincinnati. In Cincinnati's similar conditions to the U.S. Open, so maybe there's something here. as well as Felix is playing, he should win, maybe 3 games a set. I just feel like there's no real route to victory for him because he's not really consistent enough to hang in rallies with Sinner for a whole match. And that's going to be the analysis for most players going forward. If Sinner needs a big serve on a big point, he has it. He much better backhand than Felix. He's, more aggressive with it also. If Felix just hits the ball over there the way he did with Alex, it's not going to score, and he's going to have to chase balls down the line. Sinner's just too efficient right now. I think he's, after the Musetti match, I have him, as a decent favorite to win this tournament, and he has the easier semifinal here too, which bodes well for him. So I like Sinner there, and tempting to say 3, given the head-to-head, might be a sneaky 4-setter coming in, but hard to see Felix winning unless he, winning even a set, unless he really elevates his level. I don't think he has the rally tolerance that Musetti had in that second set where he was threatening. And Musetti also is able to generate ridiculously good depth and power from anywhere on the court with his forehand, which helped him a lot. Sinner had him toasted really cross court in some rallies, and Musetti just came up with depth and got himself back in the rally. His backhand a little bit better defensively too than Felix, so I think the task here is too simple for a Sinner. The other match is the one we came to see, Djokovic and Alcaraz, is going to be tremendous. Djokovic just turned in a top 10 performance against Fritz. He demonstrated one of the best levels of anybody so far this tournament in terms of consistency. Just did not miss. One of the best matches I think Fritz has ever played in tennis in his career, period. He was really solid, grinded out rallies, ran constantly. Just a great match for him. 46-42 is great numbers as far as winners to unforced errors. It's funny that Djokovic was in the negative for that stat. Especially because it felt like Djokovic was the one who just wouldn't miss at the end of rallies. Didn't see, injury issues for Djokovic in this one. He's probably the healthiest he's been so far this season in any tournament. For Fritz, I think for me, watching him, watching his career, this is one of his best results ever. For him, he's probably a bit frustrated. He probably feels like he had some chances, to get a set or two. I don't really agree. It felt like his only path to victory here was if Djokovic got exhausted and fell over. And, to Fritz's credit, he played the match in a way that could have happened if it was going to. The rallies were extremely long. They played 3.5 hours. Djokovic did double over after a bunch of points, but it felt like the Monfils theatrics where, part of it's for the crowd. The rallies were long. Playing a 30-shot rally where you're scrambling is exhausting for any athlete, but Djokovic seems to be resetting very easily in this tournament. He seems like he's, good to go the distance, which he'll need to have against Alcaraz. For Fritz also, I feel like he didn't serve well early in the match. Wasn't really landing first serves early. Kind of opened up a bit in the second and third set. Started to score going wide. But then Novak just sat on that. If you are scoring with one thing, Djokovic is going to sit on that thing and force you to come up with something else. And then you have to be a complete tennis player. And these guys are, but not at a world-class level. Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic, Nadal, Murray, Federer. These are guys who don't have a hole in their game, but also they do everything really well, right? So even if you force them to not do one thing, they can do the other thing efficiently for a whole match. Some of these other guys on tour can't really yet. Djokovic probably might have been a little susceptible to the drop shot, which I think is going to be an issue against Alcaraz. Fritz only played a handful. I think Fritz, could have gotten a net a little bit more. Not really. He didn't really hit a lot of shots where it was clearly timed to get to net. I just think that does apply pressure. We've seen a lot of people serve volley Djokovic and do well. Tough to do when you're out there and you don't feel like the opportunity is really there. And when every point is a grind, I think you also don't really want to risk giving up, love 15, love 30, risking things. But that's why it's maybe something to go for early. Also, I think since Fritz is, 0-10 against Djokovic, he probably doesn't want to, deviate from his best attributes. He probably wants to grind and hit the ball. And, since Djokovic is a little older, you want to ask that question. He certainly did, but Djokovic had the answer. I felt like in rallies, Djokovic was the one able to infuse a little more pace when he had balls to hit. It felt like Fritz couldn't really get out of the rallies, even though he was able to extend them all and play even in them. So, great win for Djokovic. And now a very tricky spot. I think this being the day match is, not as good for Novak. The ball will be a little faster than it would be at night, but, it's also going to be a warm, sweaty affair. And that is, Djokovic should be fine, but if there are going to be any issues, day match is not as good. Obviously, the tournament would probably want this at night, just to sell more tickets. They're certainly selling some tickets. Sad. The women's semifinal today had, half the stadium was empty. It's difficult to see. They're selling tickets for like $1,000 for the most part or more for these semifinals. And, people aren't buying them, or corporations are, buying blocks and not really doing anything with the tickets. It's not good for the sport. Good for the tournament to try to get their money back. But overall, it seems like the production value is getting higher and higher, and the experience is getting worse and worse. I've made a couple jokes about the thing being too expensive, and it's not disastrous, but I think they've kind of lost the plot. When the tickets are so expensive that people aren't going, when the semifinals, when the best match of the tournament, Anisimova and Osaka has been the best match, I think, for the women's side. And when the best match of the tournament has half the stadium empty, you're kind of screwing things up, because the crowd does really lend something to the event. But anyway, Djokovic, has done okay against Alcaraz in the past. Beat him in Australia in the beginning of this year. That's a tremendous win. Bit of a surprise to some people. Alcaraz didn't play the best match there. Djokovic beat him. I think this is the Olympics. Yeah, and clay, which is, the biggest surprise, I think, so far in their matchup. Maybe the Wimbledon win for Alcaraz was, but, they're familiar with each other's games. Alcaraz pretty much has had an easy draw. Lehechka in the quarterfinals is you're happy with that. If you're most of the top five, he's a good player, but not really dangerous. Doesn't really have the rally tolerance either to really beat Alcaraz. Lehechka played well and asked questions, but couldn't really pull away. These big hitters, it's going to be hard for them to beat Alcaraz and Sinner because it's going to take so many shots. They're either going to get worn down, and struggle to serve, or they're going to, make unforced errors. And I think, that puppy dog aspect of Alcaraz, where he's happy to play you in cat and mouse rallies, and he's happy to trade power with you, and he's, just really he's really enjoying being out there. I think it makes things tricky for these lower tier players to really snag him with that power approach. I think, the guys like Zhumer, who are challenging Alcaraz to supply his own offense, have a slightly better chance of him, coughing up a set. They're not going to beat him, but, Alcaraz, between him and Sinner, I think, I had said he's the less efficient player at times, So that is probably Djokovic's path through here. He might want a red line. We have seen him in the past just go, all out with his ground strokes and just try to break the other player, try to make it a match where he gets control. When you're going toe-to-toe in those rallies, the player who kind of checks out with a slice or, tries to put a little height or depth on the ball first tends to give up control. Alcaraz is a great retriever, and sometimes retrievers can get into that mode. So Djokovic will want control here. It also will give him control of kind of the tempo that the match is played at, if he's able to do that. I don't really know if he can. Alcaraz has kind of ironed out most of the issues with his backhand. It's weird to say that he's going to win, in 4 sets if he just lost in 4 sets in Australia. These are very similar conditions. Maybe better for Djokovic, honestly, because, the heat is not going to be a huge factor here. It's going to be hot during the day, but, not the way it is in Australia. So, tricky stuff here. I think, since Fritz wasn't able to end rallies, I think it makes that match not as impressive from Djokovic. I feel like Alcaraz just has way more variety. He's able to play drop shots. He's good at net. So that's positive for him. I think also Alcaraz takes his backhand down the line way better than Fritz, way more disguised. So I think that's a big difference. If you want to talk about speed, Alcaraz is, twice as fast as Fritz. Alcaraz might be one of the fastest players on tour. Fritz might be, one of the slower guys who's ever been in the top 10. So that's a difference here. Now, Djokovic's ground strokes will be, under more scrutiny in that sense. When he has the open court, more pressure. When he goes for a drop shot, more pressure. So there's that difference. Fritz has a tremendous forehand, but, more whippy than flat. And Alcaraz is able to flatten it out. He does go with more RPMs and plays with a lot of spin, big loopy forehands when he needs to, but he can also flatten the ball out in a way that Fritz really can't. And that's tricky for Djokovic. I also think, maybe on paper, Fritz sounds like a bigger server than Alcaraz, but I think Alcaraz having more variety gives him a big boost against Djokovic. Djokovic is, Fritz is going T or wide pretty much all the time. And, he does those things fairly well, but it's 2 choices. And I think Alcaraz has more variation in terms of, the speed he's serving at. Sometimes he'll hit the big kick serve. Sometimes he'll take something off from the deuce side and send it wide. He can tee serve with power when he needs to. He can drive the ball out wide. He can hit flat serves. He just has every option. And I think even though he's not the biggest server in terms of mile per hour, I think it feels bigger than that because he mixes it up. When he does go big, it's a test. And Djokovic is one of the best returners of all time. But this is going to be tricky. I like Alcaraz, basically. I like Alcaraz to win, in 5. And it's going to be interesting here. This is a match I'm looking at, for information about the finals. And I think if Alcaraz wins this in 5, it's a great win. I'm assuming Djokovic is going to play very well. It's not going to be Alcaraz played poorly if it goes to 5 sets. But that would make me think that Sinner wins the finals. If Alcaraz can win in 4, I think the finals will be pretty even. If Alcaraz can straight set him, it might be revenge time there. But I don't think that's possible. Unless Djokovic is really feeling it from the Fritz match. There's a chance maybe he's exhausted at this point, but he's had 2 days of rest. He wants this. He's in good shape. He's very experienced. He had success against Alcaraz before. There's really nothing stopping him here from this being an absolute classic. I think that's what we're going to get. For Djokovic, I think, the task is not too complex, even though it's difficult. When you play somebody and there's some specific weakness that you should go to or some tactic you should constantly employ, it gets tricky because, you want to do that, and anytime you go away from it, you're going to regret it if you lose the point. Maybe you should pepper their backhand, but the times you go to their forehand, maybe it was the right shot, but the time they actually, hit a pass on you, you're frustrated. You're like, I should have just, stuck with the generic plan. I think here, because Alcaraz doesn't have a clear weakness, I think it lets Djokovic just play tennis, and that's when he's at his best, when he's just competing and he's not thinking about, specific plans. He's just going to the right shot. One of the best tennis minds ever. One of the best players as far as managing matches ever. Also, I think he'll call his timeouts at the right time. He'll change gears at the right time. He's able to dial up big serves still when he needs to. I just think overall, Alcaraz is able to bring the same level of grit and tenacity that Fritz did. And I think he's able to get himself out of those rallies also. So, long day for Djokovic. And I like Alcaraz in 4 or 5. And it's 3 a.m. So I'm just going to post this and try to be interesting and funny in the finals or something. Or whatever people are expecting. I don't really know. But the cat has stopped making noise, which is good. I hope it found some cat activities or whatever cats do at night. I don't know what cats do at night. Do you? Yeah, you probably do. All right, bye.